Oxygen therapy used to mean lying perfectly still in a hospital wing. Today, you are just as likely to see an elite athlete or an executive using it to accelerate recovery. For these users, oxygenating the blood is only half the goal. The real benefit comes from pushing that oxygen deep into the tissues, a process that requires active cardiovascular movement while inside the chamber. But there is a significant engineering bottleneck. We are trying to run modern exertion protocols using a breathing architecture that was locked in place in 1968, designed specifically for patients who sat perfectly still. It is called a built-in breathing system, or Bibs. It is the standard, tightly sealed demand valve mask you'll find in almost every clinical and wellness chamber currently in operation. When a user starts pedaling a bike or rowing inside the chamber, they breathe heavier. The Bibs architecture cannot clear the resulting spike and exhaled carbon dioxide fast enough. The industry is pushing for active recovery, but the 60-year-old hardware they rely on physically prevents safe exertion under pressure. In the 1960s, both clinical hyperbaric medicine and the commercial diving industry started out using the exact same respiratory technology. Working divers, however, do intense physical labor hundreds of feet underwater. If their equipment traps carbon dioxide, it becomes a lethal hazard. The diving industry had no choice but to engineer strict solutions. They developed rigorous protocols. Diving agencies now measure the exact work of breathing in joules per liter and strictly enforce carbon dioxide clearance under heavy metabolic load. Look at this timeline comparing the two fields. The top track shows diving's continuous updates to breathing standards. The bottom track is hyperbaric medicine. Because hyperbaric patients historically just lay there, the mask's respiratory failures stayed completely hidden. They never adopted a single one of those standards. If you look closely at the standards hyperbaric did adopt, they only measure the structural integrity and fire safety of the chamber vessel itself. They entirely ignore the breathing apparatus. The industry meticulously regulates the safety of the box, while completely failing to regulate the safety of the breath taken inside it. To understand why this fails during exercise, you have to look at the mechanics of the Bibs mask. It uses a demand valve regulator. That means you have to generate enough suction to physically pull a valve open with every single inhale. This animated cross-section shows the second issue, dead space. Between your mouth and the exhaust valve, there is up to 300 milliliters of trapped air. Whatever carbon dioxide you exhale into that space gets immediately drawn back into your lungs on the next breath. If you are resting and breathing a quiet 8 liters a minute, your body easily overcomes this minor resistance and small dead space penalty. But put a user on a stationary bike. Minute ventilation spikes to 40 liters per minute. Carbon dioxide production quadruples. The valve resistance shoots up, and the dead space fills entirely with high-concentration CO2 that simply cannot escape the mask fast enough. Because legacy systems lack end-tidal CO2 monitoring, the facility operator has no idea this is happening. They see a 100% oxygen saturation reading on the pulse oximeter and assume everything is fine. Add physical movement to a legacy Bibs chamber, and the mask stops being an oxygen delivery system. It becomes a carbon dioxide retention trap. We want movement under pressure for a very good reason. Exercise triples your cardiac output and opens capillary recruitment to roughly 90%. That cardiovascular transport is what pushes dissolved oxygen deep into your tissues. This diagram illustrates the human body's natural defense against elevated pressure. When breathing pure oxygen at 2 atmospheres, your cerebral blood vessels naturally constrict. This creates a protective barrier that restricts excessive oxygen from flooding the central nervous system. But remember the carbon dioxide trapped in that legacy mask. Carbon dioxide is the body's most powerful cerebral vasodilator. It forces blood vessels to rapidly open. When retained CO2 enters the bloodstream, it completely overrides your protective vasoconstriction. The vessels dilate, the barrier breaks down, and high-pressure oxygen aggressively floods the brain tissue. Clinically, this forces the user directly toward a heightened risk of central nervous system oxygen toxicity. Early CO2 toxicity feels like warmth, slight flushing, or a dreamy detachment. Facility operators routinely, and incorrectly, praise these exact symptoms as the relaxing detox effect of the therapy. The physical workout meant to maximize healing is actively pushing the user towards neurological toxicity, entirely due to the mask's engineering failure. Fixing this requires a complete architectural rethink. The complexity of the breathing system has to be removed from the user's face and distributed into the chamber itself. Modern chamber-level ventilation architectures, like those engineered by OxyHelp, pump 280 liters per minute of continuous fresh air directly through the space. This instantly washes exhaled carbon dioxide out of the environment. Because the chamber atmosphere is constantly scrubbed, the user can ditch the sealed demand valve mask entirely and breathe through a simple open nasal cannula. This means zero cracking resistance to pull a breath, zero equipment dead space, and zero work of breathing penalty. You can breathe completely unrestricted during maximum physical exertion. An open cannula does deliver a slightly lower fraction of inspired oxygen compared to a tightly sealed mask, but the powerful multiplier of exercise-driven cardiac output outpaces that minor drop in supply. You end up delivering significantly more total oxygen to the tissue. Safe movement under pressure is impossible to achieve with cheap mask retrofits. It requires a ground-up capital investment in high-flow, chamber-level ventilation. This matrix maps architectures to use cases. For immobile patients needing passive wound care, legacy BIBS in the bottom left is acceptable, but running active protocols in legacy chambers guarantees CO2 retention, trapping you in the red danger zone. Safe movement requires chamber-level ventilation in the top right quadrant. The core utility of hyperbaric therapy has completely split. Matching an active protocol to a passive architecture is a severe liability. For institutional investors, allocating capital to wellness facilities that use legacy architectures for active protocols represents a distinct stranded asset risk. For athletes and end users, if a facility asks you to exercise inside a chamber while wearing a sealed demand valve mask, you should refuse the session. Look specifically for open nasal delivery systems and ask the operators about their chamber's continuous ventilation rates before you get inside. You are paying for the cardiovascular distribution of oxygen to heal your tissues. Passive supply alone is not the goal. Ensure the chamber's engineering allows for the movement needed to complete the circuit.